The lonely millionaire Sebastian Rothell stood before the vast floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, the skyline glowing beneath him like a galaxy trapped in glass. From this height, the city seemed peaceful, silent, and far away from the restless chaos that made it alive. Yet, inside his luxurious sanctuary, there was only emptiness. At 38, Sebastian was the definition of success, a self-made billionaire who had expanded his late father's modest tech company into a global empire. His name graced magazine covers, his face appeared at charity galas, and his words could shift markets. He owned mansions, yachts, and cars that most people only saw in dreams, but none of it brought warmth. The silence of his penthouse was the kind that echoed, reminding him that even the richest man can feel poor when there is no one to share the view with. He had spent years chasing growth, expansion, recognition, all the things that his father, James Rothell, had taught him were the marks of a real man. James had believed that weakness was failure, that emotion distracted from greatness. When the old man died 5 years ago, Sebastian inherited not only his empire but also his isolation. Since then, life had become a routine of board meetings, headlines, and endless obligations disguised as opportunities. His assistants rotated like clockwork, his calendar filled every waking hour, and his relationships, when they existed, were transactional, shallow and temporary. That night, as the city lights reflected in his untouched glass of whiskey, Sebastian realized that success without meaning was just another kind of prison. He thought of his father's funeral, hundreds of attendees, but not one true friend. He remembered the sympathy in their eyes, the insincerity in their condolences, the way they spoke of legacy and influence instead of love and loss. It was in that moment, years ago, that something inside Sebastian had quietly broken. He learned to hide it beneath perfect suits and perfect control. But cracks have a way of widening when the nights get too quiet. The following morning, his schedule was already overflowing. His assistant Rachel, sharp, efficient, and loyal to the last detail, reminded him of the hospital donation ceremony that afternoon. Rothell Industries had funded a new pediatric wing at Children's Memorial Hospital, a move that made for excellent press and significant tax relief. It was supposed to be a routine act of corporate generosity. Yet when Sebastian arrived at the hospital surrounded by cameras, doctors, and executives, something unexpected happened. Among the crowd of white coats and polished smiles, he noticed a young nurse kneeling beside a frail child's bed. She wasn't posing for the cameras or trying to impress anyone. Her attention was fully on the little girl whose bald head was covered with a pink scarf. The nurse's voice was soft, telling a story from a worn-out book, her tone gentle yet filled with warmth that seemed to light up the entire room. When she smiled, it wasn't the smile of someone trying to please others. It was genuine, kind, and radiant. Her name tag read Sophia Martinez. Sophia looked up only when the hospital director introduced Sebastian to the staff. She didn't freeze or act nervous the way most people did in the presence of power. Instead, she smiled politely and said, "Thank you for what you've done for the children, Mr. Rothell. This wing will help them heal better." Her words were simple, but her sincerity was disarming. Sebastian was so accustomed to flattery and calculation that her authenticity felt almost foreign. He watched her return to the child, tucking the blanket gently, whispering something that made the little girl giggle despite her weakness. Later, when the cameras stopped flashing and the press dispersed, Sebastian found himself walking back through the hospital hallways, driven by an impulse he couldn't explain. He saw Sophia again, sitting in the small break room, her hair tied loosely, a coffee cup beside her, medical textbooks open in front of her. There was no designer bag, no expensive perfume, only quiet determination. When he greeted her, she looked surprised but not intimidated. She told him she was studying to become a nurse practitioner, working double shifts to save for tuition and to support her younger sister, Emma, who was in college. Her world was small but filled with purpose. Every sentence she spoke carried strength born not of wealth but of compassion. Sebastian was used to boardroom negotiations and political dinners where people spoke in strategies and percentages. But with Sophia, the conversation was different. When she talked about her patients, her face came alive. She told him about the children's resilience, how they found joy in the smallest victories, finishing a meal, standing for the first time after surgery, laughing through pain. Her world, though difficult, was rich with meaning. For the first time in years, Sebastian found himself listening, truly listening, not to numbers or data, but to heartbeats. When he left the hospital that day, he couldn't shake her image from his mind. That night in his penthouse, as the city stretched endlessly below him, Sebastian made an impulsive decision. In his pocket sat an invitation to the Crystal Heart Gala, an event that defined Manhattan's elite. Every year, billionaires, celebrities, and politicians gathered under chandeliers to flaunt their wealth in the name of charity. Sebastian had attended every year out of obligation, never enjoyment. But this time he wanted to go for a reason that mattered. He wanted to see the gala through different eyes, through the eyes of someone real. The next morning he returned to the hospital unannounced. He found Sophia in the corridor, helping a patient back to their room. Her surprise quickly turned to curiosity when he approached her. After a brief exchange, he said, almost awkwardly, "I have an invitation to the Crystal Heart Gala this weekend. It's a charity event for children's causes. I'd be honored if you'd attend as my guest." Sophia blinked in disbelief. "Me at that kind of event? I don't think that's—" He interrupted gently. "It's just one evening, and I'd really appreciate your company. You dedicate your life to helping children. You deserve to be in that room more than half the people attending." She hesitated, torn between humility and curiosity. It wasn't vanity that made her doubt. It was the fear of stepping into a world built on judgment and appearances. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity, not arrogance. "Just one night," she finally said, her voice soft but steady. Sebastian smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, something that hadn't happened in years. "Just one night," he repeated. When he left, Sophia stood still for a moment, heart racing. She wasn't sure why she had agreed. Perhaps it was the way he looked. Not powerful or untouchable, but lonely, almost lost. Maybe beneath his wealth there was a man searching for meaning, just as she was searching for purpose. That evening, she told her sister Emma about the invitation. Emma was thrilled and nervous all at once. "This could change everything, Sophia. Maybe he's not like the others. Maybe he really sees you." But Sophia only smiled faintly. "It's not about changing everything. It's just about showing that kindness belongs anywhere, even among diamonds." In another part of the city, Sebastian's closest friend and business partner, Damien Cross, wasn't so optimistic. "You're inviting a nurse to the Crystal Heart Gala? Sebastian, do you realize what the press will say? What the board will think?" Sebastian only shrugged. "They can think what they like. For once, I want to bring someone who reminds me why charity even exists." That night, as the city slept beneath silver clouds, two lives, one of privilege and one of perseverance, began to move toward a single intersection. Neither knew that their decision would ignite whispers across Manhattan, challenge the unwritten rules of high society, and expose the thin line between arrogance and authenticity. In his penthouse, Sebastian looked at the gala invitation on his desk. For years he had attended surrounded by people who wore masks made of gold. This time he hoped to stand beside someone who didn't need one. Somewhere across town, Sophia laid out her simple nurse's uniform for the next day's shift, unaware that her life was about to step onto a stage where hearts, not wealth, would be tested. The night before the gala, Manhattan glittered brighter than usual, as if the stars themselves were waiting for something extraordinary to happen. The night of the gala, when worlds collide, the evening of the Crystal Heart Gala arrived like a storm cloaked in elegance. Manhattan glimmered beneath the soft glow of city lights, its streets alive with sleek black cars ferrying the elite toward the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel. Cameras flashed like lightning as reporters and socialites paraded along the crimson carpet, their jewels shimmering beneath chandeliers worth more than most homes. The air buzzed with laughter, champagne glasses clinking, and the quiet hum of whispers that carried the weight of money, influence, and envy. Inside his penthouse, Sebastian adjusted his cufflinks, their diamond edges glinting faintly in the mirror. But even with his tailored tuxedo and calm composure, there was an unusual nervousness in his chest. Tonight felt different. For the first time, he wasn't attending as the untouchable billionaire who signed seven-figure checks for applause. He was attending as a man bringing someone real, someone who didn't belong to this polished circus of vanity. And deep down, he feared what this world would do to her innocence. Meanwhile, across town, Sophia stood before her small mirror, her heart thudding with disbelief. The woman staring back at her hardly seemed like herself. The emerald gown, chosen by Sebastian's stylist, fit her perfectly. flowing like liquid silk that shimmered when she moved. The delicate diamond necklace resting against her collarbone caught the light like tiny stars. Her sister Emma clapped her hands in delight, nearly tearing up. "Sophia, you look like a queen," she whispered, hugging her tightly. "He's going to be speechless when he sees you." Sophia smiled nervously. "It's just one night," she reminded herself again, though her reflection seemed to say otherwise. It wasn't vanity that made her hesitate, and it was fear. Fear of being judged, of standing among people who had never worked a 12-hour shift or skipped dinner to pay bills. She wasn't from their world, and no amount of silk could change that. But beneath that fear was a spark, a quiet resolve that whispered she deserved to stand anywhere she chose. When Sebastian's car pulled up outside her apartment, even the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The chauffeur opened the door and Sebastian stepped out, his usual confidence softened by something gentler. When he saw her descending the steps, the world seemed to blur for a moment. "You're," he began, struggling to find words that matched what he saw. "Absolutely radiant." Sophia blushed lightly, her eyes lowering. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." Her attempt at humor broke the ice and he laughed, offering his arm. As they settled into the sleek Bentley gliding through the city lights, silence stretched comfortably between them, filled with anticipation and unspoken understanding. At the gala entrance, heads turned the instant they arrived. The photographers, used to capturing predictable duos of wealth and fame, paused in confusion. The nurse's modest grace didn't fit the pattern of glitz that dominated these events. Whispers began almost immediately, soft at first, then spreading like ripples in a pond. "Who is she?" "She's not from the usual crowd." "Is Rothell losing his mind?" Olivia Hartwell, Sebastian's ex-fiancée, stood near the champagne fountain draped in a golden gown and arrogance. When she saw them enter together, her lips curved into a sharp smile that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned toward her circle of friends, heiresses and socialites with diamond smiles and venomous tongues. "He brought a nurse," she murmured, loud enough for the comment to travel. "How charitable." The women chuckled behind manicured hands, unaware that their cruelty would soon backfire. Sebastian, however, was unfazed. He escorted Sophia through the ballroom with quiet dignity, introducing her to a few acquaintances with ease. His calm presence anchored her amidst the swirling chaos of silk and perfume. Yet she could feel the weight of 100 eyes studying her every move. Some were curious, others judgmental, but she carried herself with the same composure she used in hospital corridors. Graceful, steady, unpretentious. The evening progressed with speeches, applause, and endless toasts to wealth disguised as generosity. When Sebastian was called to the stage to speak about his company's donation, Sophia watched from their table, her heart swelling unexpectedly. His words were different tonight, less rehearsed, more human. "Charity isn't about giving from abundance," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "It's about remembering what it feels like to need. Too often we write checks but forget compassion. Tonight I'm reminded that the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars but in empathy." The crowd applauded politely, some out of genuine admiration, others out of obligation. But among them, Sophia's eyes glistened. She understood what he meant because she lived it every day, giving more than she had, not for recognition but because hearts demanded it. When Sebastian returned to their table, the look they shared said everything words couldn't. As dinner began, Olivia made her move. With a deliberate sway of her golden gown, she approached their table, her expression the picture of false sweetness. "Sebastian?" she greeted smoothly, her voice dripping with honeyed disdain. "You didn't mention you were bringing company." Her gaze flickered toward Sophia, assessing her like one might examine a counterfeit gem. Sebastian's tone was calm but firm. "Olivia, this is Sophia Martinez. She works at the hospital our foundation supports. She's one of the people who actually makes a difference." Sophia extended her hand politely, but Olivia ignored it, smiling thinly. "How inspiring," she said. "A nurse at the Crystal Heart Gala, that's quite the leap." Sophia met her gaze evenly, her voice soft but steady. "It's not such a leap when you remember the gala is for children in need. That's my world every day." The remark, though gently spoken, landed like a quiet thunderclap. Several guests nearby glanced up, surprised. Olivia's smile faltered slightly before she excused herself. Her pride stung in front of the very people she sought to impress. Sebastian's eyes sparkled with admiration as he leaned closer to Sophia. "Remind me never to underestimate you," he whispered. As the night went on, something remarkable began to happen. The same guests who had whispered earlier now approached their table, not out of gossip but genuine curiosity. They asked Sophia about her work, her patients, the hospital. She spoke with heartfelt passion, painting pictures of children who fought unimaginable battles with courage and laughter. The room, once filled with hollow conversations about yachts and stock markets, suddenly grew quiet, drawn into her sincerity. By the time the orchestra began playing, the mood had shifted. People were seeing her not as an outsider, but as a mirror reflecting what charity was supposed to mean. Sebastian offered his hand and she accepted. As they danced under the soft light, the crowd watched, not out of mockery but awe. It wasn't the elegance of their movements that captivated the room. It was the authenticity between them. The billionaire and the nurse, two souls from different worlds bound by something far more valuable than money. At the edge of the dance floor, Olivia's polished mask cracked. She turned away, muttering something bitter, but her voice was drowned by applause as the orchestra swelled. For the first time, Sebastian felt truly seen. Not as a name, not as a fortune, but as a man capable of being more than his legacy. And Sophia, surrounded by people who once looked down on her, realized she didn't have to change to belong. Her worth had never needed validation from chandeliers or diamonds. As the night drew to an end, they stepped outside, the cool air of Manhattan wrapping around them like freedom. The city stretched before them, two worlds blending into one horizon. Sebastian looked at her, his voice quiet but filled with something unspoken. "You changed the room tonight," he said. Sophia smiled, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "No, Sebastian. You just opened the door." The chauffeur waited silently as they stood there for a moment, suspended between two worlds, one defined by wealth, the other by humanity. And as the night breeze carried the distant sound of music, both knew that something irreversible had begun. A connection not born from luxury, but from the simple courage to see each other for who they truly were. The backlash. When the world fights back, the morning after the Crystal Heart Gala, the city that never slept awoke buzzing with scandal and fascination. News outlets, gossip columns, and digital tabloids erupted like wildfire with headlines that shimmered across every screen in Manhattan. Billionaire Sebastian Rothell brings mystery woman to charity gala. Who is the nurse who stole the spotlight from the elite? A Rothell's rebellion, the night he defied high society. The images of Sebastian and Sophia, her emerald gown flowing, her hand in his, their eyes locked under the chandelier's light, were splashed everywhere. For the wealthy elite, it was both shocking and intoxicating. For the working class, it was a modern fairy tale. But for those closest to Sebastian's world, it was an unforgivable act of defiance. In the sleek conference room of Rothell Industries, the board of directors gathered with storm clouds in their eyes. Damian Cross sat at the head of the table, his jaw tight as the men and women around him flipped through printed articles and photographs. "This isn't just gossip," one of them muttered. "Investors are asking questions. The Harrison merger is in jeopardy. They think Sebastian's losing focus." Damian exhaled slowly, his gaze steady but burdened. "He's not losing focus," he said quietly. "He's finally remembering what it means to be human." The words, though true, carried a risk that none of them wanted to face. To them, emotions were liabilities and reputation was currency. Meanwhile, in Sebastian's penthouse, the billionaire sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through the headlines with a strange calm. The storm outside didn't bother him, not because he was used to it, but because for once the noise didn't define him. He had expected backlash. It was inevitable. Still, what he hadn't anticipated was how deeply the night had affected him. The image of Sophia's eyes shining with quiet strength as she faced down Olivia's sneer stayed with him. She hadn't needed saving. She had saved the moment herself with grace that no socialite could imitate. His assistant, Rachel, entered hesitantly, holding a stack of documents. "The media requests are piling up, sir. Everyone wants a statement." Sebastian set down his tablet, his voice calm but firm. "No statements. Let them talk." Rachel nodded, but before she left, she hesitated. "If I may say so, sir, it's the first time I've ever seen you come back from a gala looking happy." Her honesty caught him off guard, and for a moment his mask slipped into a smile. Maybe happiness isn't found where I've been looking, he said, half to himself. Across the river, Sophia's morning was a different kind of chaos. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, social media messages, and co-workers all wanting to know what it was like to attend the gala with one of the richest men in New York. Her supervisor had already warned her that the hospital administration wanted to speak with her. As she hurried through the corridors, nurses and doctors stopped her with curious smiles and teasing comments. "You're famous now," one said. "You looked like a movie star," another added. But Sophia's stomach twisted with unease. Fame wasn't what she had wanted, and certainly not the kind that came from gossip. When she finally reached Dr. Patricia Wells's office, she braced herself. Patricia looked up from her desk, her kind eyes steady. "Sit down, Sophia," she said softly. "I've received several calls. Some from donors, some from the hospital board. They're concerned." Sophia's throat tightened. "Concerned? About what? I didn't do anything wrong." Patricia sighed, folding her hands. "You didn't. But people who live in glass towers don't like seeing the view disturbed. They think your presence at that gala made a statement, that you stepped out of your place." Sophia felt a sting behind her eyes, not from guilt, but from frustration. "My place?" she whispered. "I work every day for children who can't afford medicine. If standing beside the man whose money helps them is wrong, then what's right?" Patricia smiled faintly, her expression proud. "That's exactly what I told them. But understand, Sophia, the higher you rise into their world, the more they'll try to remind you where they think you belong." The words stayed with her long after she left the office. That evening she returned to her small apartment exhausted, only to find Emma waiting by the door, holding her phone with wide eyes. "Sophia, you're trending," she exclaimed. "People love you. They're calling you the heart of the gala. Look." She showed her the videos flooding social media, clips of Sophia speaking about children, the quiet strength in her voice, the way Sebastian looked at her as though nothing else existed in that ballroom. The comments were a mixture of admiration and cruelty. Some praised her for her authenticity. Others accused her of being a gold digger, a social climber, a nobody chasing a billionaire's fortune. Sophia put down the phone, her chest tightening. "People don't know me," she said quietly. "They see a dress and a moment, not the years behind it." Emma hugged her from behind. "Let them talk. You were incredible." But Sophia's mind was heavy with doubt. Her simple life had been invaded by a world she never wanted to belong to. Meanwhile, Olivia Hartwell was not finished. Her humiliation at the gala had burned like acid through her pride. Sitting in her penthouse, surrounded by friends who delighted in drama, she devised a new plan. "If he wants to parade a nurse around, let's show him what happens when you invite the help into high society," she said coldly. Within hours, gossip columns began publishing stories about Sophia's past, twisting half-truths into poison. They claimed she was ambitious, manipulative, using the hospital and her connection to Sebastian to elevate herself. Photos of her in scrubs, of her modest apartment, were splashed online as if poverty were a crime. When Sebastian saw the smear campaign, fury, unlike anything he'd felt in years, surged through him. He stormed into Damien's office, slamming the newspaper onto the desk. "Who leaked this?" he demanded. Damien looked uneasy. "Olivia, most likely. Her father still has connections in the media." "Sebastian, you have to understand, this isn't just about her. The board is nervous. They're threatening to delay the merger unless you issue a statement distancing yourself from—" Sebastian's voice cut through like thunder. "From what? From decency? From the only person I've met in years who reminds me why any of this matters." His anger was controlled, sharp, the kind that came not from pride but conviction. Damien stared at him, recognizing the man he had once admired but hadn't seen in years. A man capable of defying the entire world for something real. "Then you'd better be ready," Damien said quietly, "because they're coming after you next." That evening, Sebastian called Sophia. His voice, calm yet heavy, reached her through the line. "Sophia, I'm sorry. This is my fault. I should have protected you from all of this." She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You don't have to protect me, Sebastian. I faced worse than words. The children I care for. They fight battles every day just to breathe. I can handle gossip." Her strength humbled him, yet it also deepened his guilt. "Still, it shouldn't be this way," he said. You don't deserve to be dragged through mud for simply being kind. Their conversation stretched into the night, weaving through laughter and silence, pain and connection. They spoke not as a billionaire and a nurse, but as two people searching for meaning in a world that often confused value with price. As dawn approached, Sebastian made a promise, not to her but to himself. He would no longer live chained to image and expectation. If the world demanded that he choose between wealth and truth, he would choose truth. The next morning, he walked into a live television interview scheduled to discuss Rothell Industries' upcoming merger. When the host asked about the controversy surrounding his gala date, Sebastian didn't dodge. He looked straight into the camera and said, "Sophia Martinez is one of the most extraordinary people I've ever met. She represents everything this gala was supposed to stand for: compassion, courage, humility. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me." The clip went viral within hours. Millions watched as the billionaire who once hid behind walls of steel and silence stood tall, not for profit, but for principle. Some investors withdrew, others applauded. The world was divided, but Sebastian didn't care. For the first time in his life, he felt free. Across the city, Sophia watched the interview with tears in her eyes. Not because he defended her, but because he had spoken the truth. The kind of truth that couldn't be bought or rehearsed. She realized then that what had begun as a single act of kindness had grown into something larger than either of them, and a quiet revolution against the world's obsession with status. As the sun set over Manhattan that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and fire, two hearts, separated by distance but united by courage, carried the same thought, that perhaps love isn't about finding someone from the same world, but about finding someone who sees the world the same way. The breaking point. When love challenges power, the weeks that followed were a test of strength, loyalty, and conviction, unlike anything either Sebastian or Sophia had ever known. The night of the gala had changed everything. What began as whispers had turned into a storm, and what started as curiosity had evolved into a full-blown war between truth and image. The upper echelons of Manhattan society had been shaken by the sight of a billionaire walking hand in hand with a nurse from Queens. To them, it was not a love story. It was a scandal, a disruption of their hierarchy, an unwelcome reminder that money could never buy dignity. The tabloids continued their relentless coverage, twisting the narrative with half-truths and deliberate malice. Every morning brought a new headline, each more invasive than the last. Rothell's reputation at risk. The nurse who divided Wall Street, love or lunacy. The glare of the spotlight that had once celebrated Sebastian's power now sought to dismantle his every choice. Sebastian, however, was no longer the man who cared for appearances. He had stopped attending exclusive events, stopped hosting boardroom dinners filled with sycophants and strategic smiles. His focus had shifted entirely toward something deeper, something real. He spent his evenings at the hospital, volunteering in the pediatric wing where Sophia worked, reading stories to children and funding treatments for families who could not afford care. His presence there was quiet but consistent. At first, the staff watched him warily, unsure if his involvement was just another publicity stunt. But when they saw him kneel beside a child in a wheelchair, or spend hours comforting a parent who had lost hope, their skepticism faded. For the first time, the billionaire was among people who didn't care about his last name. They cared about his heart. Sophia had tried to warn him. "You don't have to do this," she told him one evening as they sat by the hospital garden after visiting hours, the soft hum of the city around them. "The more time you spend here, the more the press will twist it. They'll say you're pretending, that you're using me for redemption." Sebastian looked at her, his eyes steady and calm. "Let them say what they want. I spent half my life pretending to be someone I'm not. This is the first time I feel like myself." His words were quiet, but they carried the weight of truth. Sophia looked away, struggling between admiration and fear. "And what happens when your board forces you to choose?" she asked softly. "Between me and your company? Between love and legacy?" He reached for her hand, his voice firm yet gentle. "Then legacy will have to wait. I've built an empire, Sophia, but I'm tired of standing on top of a mountain made of emptiness." But the world was not ready to let him walk away so easily. Damian Cross, his best friend and business partner, was under immense pressure from investors. The merger with Harrison Industries, the deal that could shape the future of Rothell Industries, was on the verge of collapse. The Harrisons had made their stance clear. As long as Sebastian continued his relationship with Sophia, they would withdraw from all negotiations. Damien had defended him in countless meetings, but even he was reaching his breaking point. Finally, one late evening, he confronted Sebastian in his office. The tension in the room was suffocating. "Sebastian, you need to wake up," Damien said, slamming a stack of reports on the desk. "Do you realize what's at stake? Thousands of employees depend on this merger. Billions in projects, research, and innovations hang in the balance, and you're risking it all for what?" "A nurse?" Sebastian rose from his chair slowly, his calmness sharper than any anger. "Don't you dare reduce her to that word," he said quietly. "She has more courage, more integrity, and more compassion than anyone I've met in that boardroom. She reminds me that people matter more than profits." Damien's frustration cracked into desperation. "You sound like a dreamer. The world doesn't work like that, Sebastian. You can't fight everyone. You can't save everyone." Sebastian walked toward the window, his reflection merging with the skyline. "Maybe not," he said softly. "But I can try to save myself from becoming like them." Their friendship, built on decades of loyalty and shared ambition, began to fracture under the weight of their opposing beliefs. Damien saw Sebastian's defiance as recklessness. Sebastian saw Damien's fear as surrender. The rift widened until silence replaced understanding. Meanwhile, the Harrisons made their final move. Olivia's father, Richard Harrison, a titan of real estate and arrogance, scheduled a private meeting with Sebastian. The older man's voice, cold and commanding, echoed through the conference room. "You've embarrassed my family, humiliated my daughter, and jeopardized a billion-dollar partnership because of some charity worker. You have 24 hours to end this farce or consider the merger dead." Sebastian's answer was immediate and unwavering. "Then it's dead." The words detonated across the financial world. By the next morning, Rothell Industries stock dropped 8%. Analysts called him impulsive, unstable, and emotionally compromised. But Sebastian didn't flinch. He knew what he was doing. He had spent too long living for everyone else's approval. Losing a deal meant nothing compared to losing himself again. While he faced the corporate world's wrath, Sophia was fighting her own quiet battles. The hospital's board had called her in again, this time with sterner expressions and polite cruelty hidden behind formal language. "Ms. Martinez, your association with Mr. Rothell has brought attention to the hospital. Some positive, some less so. Donors are uneasy. We believe it would be best if you took a temporary leave of absence." The words hit her like a blow. "A leave? For what?" "For doing my job. For caring for someone who happens to be wealthy." The chairman sighed, avoiding her eyes. "You've become a distraction, Sophia. The media presence, the questions, it's affecting morale." She walked out of that meeting feeling the sting of injustice burn deep in her chest. The world that had once applauded her compassion now turned its back on her because she dared to step beyond invisible lines. That evening, Sebastian arrived at her apartment, his eyes immediately reading the pain she tried to hide. "They suspended me," she said quietly. He froze. "Because of me?" She nodded, forcing a smile. "Don't look so guilty. Maybe they're right. Maybe we live in two different universes and crossing over was never meant to last." Sebastian took a slow breath, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "Sophia, do you really believe that?" She hesitated. "I believe that love doesn't always win against power." He moved closer, his voice low, raw with emotion. "Then maybe it's time power learns what love really looks like." He didn't wait for permission. Over the next days, Sebastian used his influence not to protect his company or his reputation, but to protect her cause. He donated millions to the hospital, but under one condition: that Sophia be reinstated and allowed to lead a new foundation within the hospital, focusing on pediatric research and family support. The board had no choice but to agree. When the news broke, the public reaction shifted dramatically. The same headlines that once condemned her now began to call her the nurse who changed a billionaire's heart and the woman behind a new age of compassionate wealth. But even as the tide of opinion began to turn, both knew the battle wasn't truly about image. It was about the courage to remain true when the world demanded compromise. Late one night, standing together on the balcony of his penthouse, they watched the city lights shimmer beneath them like scattered stars. Sophia leaned against the railing, her voice soft but steady. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me over everything you built?" He smiled faintly, his eyes distant yet warm. I didn't choose between you and my world, Sophia. I chose the world I want to live in, and it happens to have you in it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. You know they won't stop, right? The press, the gossip, the judgment. It'll follow us everywhere. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Then let them follow. Maybe they'll learn something. The wind carried their words into the night, over the city that had watched their journey with fascination and fury. The skyline glowed beneath the moonlight, vast and endless, a reminder that love, like the city itself, could rise even from the hardest foundations. But as peace settled momentarily between them, fate was already preparing its next test. For in the world they lived in, power never surrendered easily, and hearts that dared to defy it often faced their greatest trials at the moment they thought they had finally won. The redemption, when hearts rewrite destiny. The first chill of winter swept through Manhattan, but the city still pulsed with its usual defiance against the cold, a million lights glowing defiantly through the falling snow. The storm that had surrounded Sebastian and Sophia's story was beginning to calm, not because the world had forgotten, but because the world was beginning to understand. The story of the nurse who had softened the heart of a billionaire had become something larger than gossip. It had become a symbol. It spoke to something every person, rich or poor, secretly longed for, the belief that love, decency, and courage could still triumph in a world that too often rewarded greed and arrogance. In the weeks that followed, the scandal that once threatened to destroy Sebastian's reputation began to redefine it. Articles that had once mocked him now praised his authenticity. News anchors spoke about his bold refusal to conform. He turned his empire into empathy, one headline read. But Sebastian wasn't chasing headlines. He had long since learned that public admiration was as fickle as fame itself. His focus remained on something far more lasting, the foundation he had built with Sophia. Together, they established the Crystal Heart Initiative, named after the very gala that had changed everything. The foundation aimed to provide medical care for underprivileged children across the country. Blending his financial power with her experience and compassion, their partnership was unlike anything the city's philanthropic world had seen. Sebastian handled the negotiations, the funding, the endless bureaucracy that came with changing lives at scale, while Sophia worked tirelessly on the ground, training nurses, visiting clinics, and personally ensuring that every donation reached those who needed it most. The media, hungry for spectacle, tried to romanticize their work, but the two of them ignored the cameras. What they were doing wasn't a show, it was redemption. For Sebastian, it was redemption from years of hollow success. For Sophia, it was redemption from a system that had once made her feel small for daring to dream beyond her social class. But even in this new chapter of light, shadows lingered. The merger he had sacrificed for his convictions had left financial scars. Rothell Industries was stable but vulnerable, and rival corporations were circling like vultures, eager to exploit his perceived weakness. Damian Cross, who had once been his closest friend and fiercest critic, had resigned from the company, unable to reconcile his pragmatic nature with Sebastian's newfound idealism. Their friendship, bruised by business and ego, seemed lost forever. Yet in quiet moments, Sebastian missed him, not as a partner in profit, but as the brother who had stood beside him through every rise and fall. Sophia noticed the weight he carried, even when he tried to hide it behind quiet smiles and unspoken reassurances. One evening, as they stood together in the small rooftop garden of her apartment, she turned to him and said softly, "You've given so much to everyone, Sebastian. But when will you forgive yourself?" He looked at her, confused. "Forgive myself for what?" She held his gaze. "For being human. For not being the man your father expected you to be. For losing things that were never yours to keep." Her words, gentle and piercing, sank into him deeper than any boardroom betrayal ever had. He closed his eyes, the cold air sharp in his lungs. "I don't know if I can," he admitted. "All my life I thought strength meant control. But you've shown me it means surrender, trusting someone enough to let go." She smiled, the kind of smile that healed without words. "Then start with trusting me," she whispered. And for the first time, he did. Months passed, and the Crystal Heart Initiative began to flourish. Children's hospitals across the state were equipped with new technology, treatment programs expanded, and families who had once faced despair now found hope. Sophia became the face of the movement, not because of fame, but because people believed in her authenticity. When she spoke at public events, her words were simple yet powerful. "You don't need to be rich to change the world," she would say. "You just need to care enough to start." Her speeches went viral, inspiring thousands of nurses, doctors, and ordinary citizens to volunteer. Sebastian watched from the sidelines with quiet pride. He didn't need to stand beside her to feel complete. Her light reached him wherever she went. Then came a moment neither of them expected. Damien returned. It happened on a gray afternoon when the city was caught between rain and snow. Sebastian was in his office reviewing reports when the door opened, and his old friend stepped in, older and wearier than before. The air was thick with history, but beneath the silence was something unspoken, a desire to mend what ambition had broken. "You were right," Damien said finally, his voice low. "I thought you were throwing everything away, but you were building something better. I couldn't see it then." Sebastian stood, emotion tightening his throat. "You haven't lost everything, Damien," he said quietly. "You just have to stop fighting the wrong battles." Their reconciliation wasn't dramatic or tearful. It was quiet, the way real forgiveness often is. Together, they began rebuilding Rothell Industries from the inside, aligning its business practices with the compassion that had defined Sebastian's new philosophy. Profits grew again, but this time so did purpose. The company that once thrived on competition began to thrive on contribution. Shareholders adapted, markets stabilized, and slowly, the empire that had nearly collapsed found a new foundation, one built not on power, but on principle. In the following year, the Crystal Heart Initiative hosted its first global summit, bringing together philanthropists, scientists, and caregivers to discuss healthcare reform. It was held, ironically, in the same ballroom where the infamous Gala had taken place. This time there were no whispers, no judgmental stares, only applause and admiration. Sophia stood on the stage, her voice resonating through the vast hall as she spoke about the children they had saved, the lives they had touched, and the lessons they had learned. "When we stop measuring people by what they own," she said, "and start measuring them by what they give, that's when humanity truly evolves." As the audience rose in a standing ovation, Sebastian watched her from the front row, his heart swelling with pride. The nurse he had met in a hospital corridor had become a voice that could move nations. When she stepped down, he took her hand, and for a moment time seemed to still. The ghosts of their past, the loneliness, the fear, the doubt faded into the background, leaving only two people who had fought the world and won by staying true to themselves. Later that night, as they stood together beneath the Manhattan skyline, the same city that had once mocked them now glittered like a witness to their journey. Snowflakes drifted gently through the air, settling on her hair like tiny stars. Sebastian wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his voice soft. "You know," he said, "my father used to tell me that success is about leaving your mark on the world." I think he was half right. Sophia looked up at him, smiling. "And what do you think now?" He gazed at the horizon, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "I think success is about leaving the world better than you found it, and finding someone who makes it worth the fight." She leaned into him, their silhouettes framed against the glittering skyline, two souls who had rewritten the rules of worth and love. And as the snow continued to fall, gentle and unending, it felt as though even the city itself had stopped to listen to the quiet triumph of a love that refused to bow to power. Their story, born from scandal and forged through struggle, had become something greater than either of them imagined, a testament to the truth that sometimes the heart of the world beats strongest in the people who dare to be kind. And so, beneath the lights of a city that once judged and now admired them, the lonely millionaire and the humble nurse found not only each other, but a purpose that outlasted fame, wealth, and time itself. Their love had become a legacy, and their legacy had become hope.